Daily. Thank you, Jonathan. And now we bring in our friend from The Athletic to discuss the final 5 games of the Vikings season, Arif Hasan. What's going on, Arif?
Hey, not much. What's going on with you?
Well, I made a couple of decisions after last night. I decided on takes, and I'm going to stick with them no matter what happens. Okay, I'm going to give you both of them. Take number one is the team that the Minnesota Vikings last want to face in this entire world of the NFL is the San Francisco 49ers. Take number two is that the team they most would want to face in the playoffs is the Green Bay Packers. How do you feel about those two takes?
Well, I love take one. I strongly believe in take one, and only because the Patriots play in the AFC. Take two is interesting because I don't like. I feel like it might be Dallas, but Dallas is better than the record, and the Packers are worse than the record. So I think there's an argument that you could make it about the Packers. Yeah.
And I think that Dallas, the reason that they would concern me quite a bit if you had to go to Dallas would be their quarterback. I mean, Dak Prescott, even yesterday, it was a mess and he was not perfect by any means, but he puts them in position to win. The reason that you would love to face Dallas is that their coach is clueless entirely when it comes to managing a game, and you'll probably just win because of it. But the reason that I would pick Green Bay is, like you said, I think they are worse than their record. They had a bunch of things go their way early in the season, including one botched call. I forget exactly what happened. There's been an avalanche of botched calls this year, but they shouldn't have gotten a win there. They should not have gotten a win against the Vikings. They were getting steamrolled, and obviously Kirk Cousins threw that game away. So they could easily be much worse than their record. And looking at Aaron Rodgers when he's under pressure now is almost a little sad, Arif. It's like, where did the athleticism go of this guy to be able to break out and make plays? And I just don't think it's there anymore. And he goes under the category of quarterbacks that you have to now scheme him to have great numbers as opposed to him doing it himself. And I'll take that in the playoffs.
Yeah, that's a fair point. 3 yards per attempt, I think, last night against 49ers.
Crazy.
Obviously, the 49ers, great defense, but that is the kind of performance that a bad quarterback puts up against a great defense. They'll hold everybody down, but to hold someone down to 3 yards per attempt, wild. And the thing is, he was under pressure with like an average of like 34% of the time. I was looking this up, and he suffered from 2 drops, a couple of pass deflections, obviously, that could have gone his way, but he had -6 yards in the air. And so 110 yards after the catch. So he had over 100% of his yards come after the catch against the 49ers. And I think that you're right. I think that he doesn't really have what made him great. And I think people are really clinging to it because the stuff that he was great at, especially when he was really phenomenal, 2011, 2012, 2013, is the stuff that he continues to be really good at. But it's all the stuff in between that he's no longer consistent at, that he's no longer performing really well at. And like you said, some of the stuff that he's really well known for, that athleticism moving out of the pocket, he doesn't seem to have anymore. And so that stuff in between is the reason that offense isn't getting into scoring position all that often. And so his interception numbers continue to look great, and he's got these really amazing highlight throws. But in between the highlight throws and the ability to avoid interceptions, he's just missing yards on the field. And so he's not moving the offense.
And there were other times, Arif, where he would stand in the pocket forever. Like he could make some eggs and bacon back there and eat them and then find somebody open. And with Bulaga going out last night and then the dominance of the San Francisco defensive line, they were just on top of him quick, and he was not comfortable back there, and he couldn't stand back forever and wait for somebody to get open down the field. And I would think that the Vikings, having Danielle Hunter and Everson Griffin and the way they've gotten after quarterbacks, would be a good matchup to go up against Aaron Rodgers in a playoff game because they're going to be able to create pressure by themselves. I don't think Bakhtiari is the same guy this year as he's been at times in the past. And if Bulaga is hurt or not playing, and you've got Danielle Hunter against the backup tackle, I mean, that's just going to be a bloodbath there. And I think the Vikings will not only beat them at US Bank Stadium, but if they play again in the playoffs, that they'll win again.
I think that's absolutely on the table. One of the interesting things is that the Packers, I think this year, have the second best ESPN pass block win rate, which means that their offensive line has done a really incredible job in the first 2 seconds at winning the snap. But his pressure rate, like I said, is average. So he's causing a lot of the pressure that they're seeing this year. And then On top of that, he's been able to get away with that in the past because he's been able to perform really well under pressure. On top of that, he's not performing under pressure that he's inviting despite doing a really great job of surrounding himself with these really amazing offensive linemen. And now, if you're losing talent in terms of like a talent drop off in Bakhtiari or an injury to Balaga, that just exacerbates everything. Like you said, the Vikings have a ton of defensive line talent that are primed to take advantage of this specific issue, and they do really well, specifically against the Packers tackles. I think it's the familiarity thing, and that can cause a lot of problems. And like you said, he's not creating that kind of magic under pressure. Like, yeah, every so often we'll see, that kind of flick of the wrist, 4th and 4, you convert by throwing to the running back who nobody saw. Incredible. But you can't do that every single time you're in 3rd and long, and he didn't.
Talking with Arif Hasan of The Athletic. Let's talk about the other side of the hot take, which is that San Francisco would be the team you would absolutely not want to face if you're the Vikings. And there's a long way to go before we understand how these seedings are going to play out. San Francisco's got a very tough schedule. Seattle, with a win against the Vikings, all of a sudden would have a chance to potentially win the West. So there's a lot to still be decided here. But I look at that defensive line from San Francisco and just say, yep, that would be, if you were designing a team to beat the Vikings, that would be it. If you can dominate with those guys against the Vikings in pass protection and you can shut down the run with 4 guys up front and not having to load the box, it's going to be very, very difficult for the Vikings to win. And I think what it would look like is a lot of what we saw last night from Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, absolutely. And they use that talent really well, too. Like, it's one thing to have really, like, 4 really incredible defensive linemen and then just have them rushing straight ahead. But they're confusing. They do these stunts and twists. And the Packers offensive line normally communicates really well. And we just saw Rodgers, like, in a pile of 49ers uniforms because people were missing blocks. They didn't really know kind of what their assignment was. And the Vikings offensive line doesn't nearly have that chemistry. Like, they may be improved over the past couple of years, low bar, but it's not enough to deal with a defensive line like that individually has a ton of really great talent and then really maximizes the use of that talent with the stuff that they do up front. And plus, like you mentioned, I mean, the Vikings do like to run the ball a lot, and they do a really great job of preventing that from being, especially because they got that linebacker Fred Warner, who's doing a great job shutting down the run and in coverage.
And when you look at the other side, I don't necessarily trust Jimmy Garoppolo to win a Super Bowl, but once they got Sanders and Kittle comes back, as you saw last night, he scores a touchdown. I think we would be looking at Kubiak and A. Shanahan, Kyle Shanahan, sort of doing the Spider-Man meme and pointing at each other a little bit. But Shanahan is just on a different level, it seems, of offensive creativity. There's no team that you see people running wide open down the field more than with Kyle Shanahan. And even when the 49ers played the Vikings here at US Bank Stadium to start last season, there were several opportunities that were missed from wide open receivers where Kyle Shanahan had just out-schemed the Vikings defense. And now we're looking at a worse version of the Vikings defense. I think that would be a major problem too if they were going up against San Francisco.
Yeah, I was just about to bring that up, that they had a lot of opportunities that they didn't convert. Just, George Kittle dropped a pass. He doesn't do that a ton. I think deep downfield with Eric Kendricks in coverage, they ran a pretty similar concept, except Kittle was going the other way now on that touchdown that he scored against Green Bay. Just a really incredibly creative staff that does, and Shanahan in particular, that does a great job of attacking specifically the Vikings. They did a really great job that they just didn't happen to finish with, and we get to see it again and again. And Shanahan has a history of being really good at designing an offense. He didn't really have the receiving weapons for his entire tenure in San Francisco, but you saw what he did in Atlanta, and like obviously the Super Bowl mistake aside, I mean it was an MVP offense, one of the best offenses in the NFL. And now that they continue to grow and have additional weapons, they've got at least Jimmy Garoppolo. He's at least got like weapons that himself that it's difficult to counter. I remember when the Jacksonville Jaguars were playing them back in 2017, and they had this really remarkable defense. They couldn't deal with how quickly Garoppolo got rid of the ball. They couldn't react in time. And that's just something, no matter kind of how good the quarterback is, it's difficult to deal with. And you pair him with someone like Shanahan, you add Sanders, you've got Kittle, and it's just a mess. It's a lot to deal with, and it's difficult to read a quarterback like that.
I want to ask you about these final games for the Vikings, Arif, because this is the year of they didn't play anybody. Like I've never seen such a gap between the really good teams and the bad teams, or I should say, so many bad teams that if you played them, you automatically won. And if they're on your schedule, it basically doesn't count. So the Vikings have, win against New York. Sorry, doesn't count. Win against Washington. Nope, can't include that one. Even last week against Denver, everyone told us how much better Denver was. And then they went to Buffalo and scored 3 points and threw for 82 yards. So sorry if I'm not buying that is some sort of great win for the Vikings. And they're so close to these last two games to having lost both of them to Dallas and Denver. As they go to Seattle, as they have to play a Los Angeles team that loses every game by exactly 7 points, play Green Bay again, a Chicago team that has solved them every time Kirk Cousins has gone against them in his career as a Viking. How tough is this schedule, and how much do we trust this Vikings team?
The toughness of the schedule is actually really difficult to crack because you've got these mysteries with like Green Bay. I think the Chargers, who, like you said, they're always in one score games at the end. They happen to lose them, but the Vikings are the kind of team that you'd feel comfortable saying that's the Chargers' one win in a one score game. It's weird, right? Because like you said, the Bears have solved Kirk Cousins, but they're just a bad team.
Right.
So I don't know if they'll be prepared based off of what they'll be doing in the final 5 weeks of the season to enter the playoffs, to enter the Thunderdome. Like it's going to be tough because when the Vikings face challenges, with the exception of the Denver game, it really feels like they haven't been up to meet those challenges. Like obviously they played well in the Cowboys game, but it's just so difficult to say that, hey, they got this one win, it was really incredible. They came back from no one's ever done it before. And part of that is because the Denver Broncos offense scored 3 points in the second half. How often are you going to say that with this defense, that they'll be able to mount that kind of comeback again? So it's tough to trust this team, but at the same time, there's going to be some playoff teams that are part of that bad team category that I think the Vikings should be able to put away. So it's interesting. I would not put them in the class of the NFC, but they've got a shot. If Kirk Cousins can Eli Manning his way through the playoffs, they've got a shot.
Yeah, from one perspective, you would say, well, I mean, they're just better than most of these teams. They're better than Los Angeles. I think they're better overall than Green Bay. Even if their records are the same, they're much better than Chicago. But then you're like, well, okay, the Chicago defense, and it's still Aaron Rodgers, and it's still Russell Wilson here. But I'm fascinated, Arif, how that this one game against Seattle next Monday night can swing the entire playoff machine. I was playing around with it last night on ESPN. If you just go to ESPN.com/NFL/playoffs/machine, if you really want to exercise the slash button, or just type in playoff machine. I don't care how you get there. Anyway, it's fun to play with. And I was putting in just, well, what happens if the Vikings win the rest of their games? And what happens if this and whatever? And the scenarios are all over the place. And I think that this game can really swing them from, could you potentially have a home playoff game, which I think the Vikings can win against almost anyone if they're playing at US Bank Stadium, versus potentially having to go on the road where I would not trust them.
Right, yeah, and it's weird because Seattle is this immensely talented team that just makes it difficult for themselves all the time. And so you get to, it's a situation where you have to trust that the team can pounce on opportunities, and I don't know that this is a team that necessarily pounces on opportunities. There's a lot of opportunities available in that Green Bay game that they missed out on, and I think part of the reason they had to come back from Denver in the first place is because they were missing opportunities that existed in the first half. So it's tough to say that this is a team that pounces on opportunities, but they'll be there, and Seattle doesn't unleash its super weapon, passing the ball, until about the fourth quarter. So there's opportunities, but I mean, Russell Wilson is one of the 3 best quarterbacks in the NFL right now, and Kirk Cousins, despite having a statistical resume that says something like that, isn't. So it'll be a really ridiculously tough game, and like you said, it defines so much because it might control who gets the number 1 or 2 seed. It might control whether or not the Vikings have a conference tiebreaker with Green Bay if something goes weird on Green Bay's end. It controls a lot.
Yeah, and it just the kind of perfect setup as we go into the final stretch of the season for two teams that are playing really great. And like you mentioned, the quarterback play, statistically, you got the number 1 and number 2 quarterback rating quarterbacks in the NFL at this moment. So it should be a very exciting one to look forward to. So Arif, great stuff. Appreciate you coming on, and hopefully